Okay, now if you look at our tables, there are a couple of issues here. One is in this name column. Look at the data type here. It's nvarchar of max. So when the type of a property is a string, Entity Framework by convention uses nvarchar of max for that. Also, you can see that this column is nullable. And again, the reason is because strings in C# are nullable. So I want to make this column required, and I want to limit the number of characters to 255. The second issue we have here is in the name of this model table. It's not plural. The reason for that is because Entity Framework core is still immature. Now, in this particular case, I don't know why it didn't realize that it should use models instead of model. So what should we do now? The problem we have here is that we have already applied this migration to our database. So we cannot remove it because the remove command only removes the migrations that have not been applied to the database. Now, technically, it is possible to downgrade the database to the version before this migration was applied. So when we run .NET EF database update, if we don't specify a migration name here, Entity Framework will upgrade the database to the last migration defined in your project. However, if you add a migration name here, and this migration is an earlier migration, Entity Framework will downgrade the database to that migration. In this case, because this is my first migration, there is no migration name that I can add here. So I should use 0. Now Entity Framework took that last migration out of my database. So back in SQL Pro, if I refresh the tables, look, makes and models are not there. And now I can remove that migration, .NET EF migrations remove, make the necessary changes to my domain model, and then recreate the migration. So technically, it is possible to remove migrations that have been applied to the database. However, this is something that I strongly recommend you not to do, because if you make a mistake, you will get into all sorts of weird issues. So the better approach is to treat your database like your source code repository. Think of Git. When we commit our code to Git, if we make a mistake, there is no undo. If you want to undo our changes, we have to make another commit. So in this case, I'm going to go to the make class, apply a data annotation here, required, resolve the namespace. This will make the column not nullable. And here I'm going to apply another attribute, string length, and set it to 255 characters. I'm going to copy this, go to the model class, and apply these two attributes on the name property as well. And finally, I'm going to apply the table attribute on the class itself to change the corresponding table name to models. Now, if you have seen my Entity Framework course, you know that I personally prefer Fluent API to data annotations because data annotations have limitations. And as your domain model evolves, you will encounter scenarios where you can only implement them using Fluent API. And then you will end up with a mix of some parts implemented using data annotations and the other parts implemented using Fluent API. And over time, this becomes a little bit messy and unmaintainable. But for now, I would prefer the simplest solution. So I'm going to use data annotations. And if in the future we need Fluent API, then I can come back and refactor my code. Okay, so we have made the necessary changes to our domain model. Now let's create a new migration. So .NET EF migrations add, apply constraints. Okay, now let's quickly review this new migration. So it's dropping our foreign key and primary key, and this is required in order for Entity Framework to rename the table. So here we have rename table from model to models. Then the corresponding index is updated. And finally, we have an alter column. So we're changing the name column in models table. We're applying a maximum of 255 characters, and this column is not going to be nullable. The rest of the code is similar. So now I'm going to update the database. .NET EF database update. So both our migrations are now applied to the database, and we can verify that by going back here, refresh, we have makes and models, and here's our name column, which is now nvarchar of 255, and it's not nullable. Next, I'm going to show you how to populate these tables with reference data.